Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us at today's webinar on security in the age of AI, risks, rewards, and responsibilities. For anyone who's joining from Australia today, I wanted to acknowledge that we are all meeting on Aboriginal land. For me, that is the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It is a space where knowledge has been shared and ideas have been exchanged for millennia, and the panel and I are very honoured to continue that tradition today. We'd also like to warmly welcome any First Nations people who might be attending. While our panelists are here representing their organisations, the views and the ideas and experience that they express are their own and doesn't necessarily reflect that of their organisations. Okay, with all of that out of the way, I started my practice at Squire 5 months ago, and almost as soon as I joined, was given the very clear direction that I needed to host a session on AI, which, as people in this room and on this panel will know better than anyone else, is a very broad term with no settled definition. And the issues and considerations and concerns that might arise seem to vary wildly depending on the use case. Initially, I loved the idea of AI in the context of HR and recruitment. And if that interests you too, that is the topic for a roundtable that my wonderful employment partner, Nicola, and I are hosting next year. But I couldn't get past the concept of security. And I think that's because the topic is so multifaceted. The Australian Signals Directorate released their annual report recently, in which they've warned of the possibility of AI, or rather the certainty of AI enabling cyber attacks to take place at a larger scale and at a faster rate than ever before. But I think it's short-sighted to only consider AI in the context of security threats. A recent report from Microsoft, on the other hand, has found that AI is in fact revolutionizing both threat detection and threat response, with 7% greater accuracy and 22% faster speeds in if organizations use Gen AI coding tools as a form of defense. Like any other technology, then, it can be used for good or it can be used for bad. But it seems to me, at least, to be a non-negotiable for organizations to modernize their security operations with the advantage of AI, although that is a topic I would love to put to our panel. Equally, AI-enabled technologies sit across both physical and virtual security spaces. And I've been lucky enough to work with some people on the panel and vigorously debate with others the potential of AI to reinvigorate traditional physical security measures like CCTV, object detection, perimeter monitoring, and of course, facial recognition technology. However, there are valid concerns being raised by regulators and the public around whether these technologies can comfortably coexist with privacy rights and how to ensure accuracy and fairness when deploying them. Unlike other AI use cases as well, where the argument used for deployment is often efficiency, the significant consequences of either identifying or failing to identify a security failure, a security threat, excuse me, are often argued by AI advocates as a very good justification for deploying new technology. Another topic that I would love to discuss with the panel. But they say that the job of a good moderator is to know when to be quiet, which I will do imminently by handing over to my wonderful panel and asking them to introduce themselves. And if I can start with you, Deborah, that would be great.
Sure. Hello, my name's Deborah Banwell. I'm a general counsel of about 15 years, mostly in small medium enterprises, and that's anything from industrial construction to asset leasing. So it's a lot of physicality associated with the work that I do. Often sole counsel in an organisation and bringing in complex concepts into a group of people who've often never seen it before in the organisation. So I do a lot of plain language speak in terms of how I relate with IT and finance and ops teams. So happy to help you here today if I can.
Thanks, Deb. Can I pass on to you, Gaurav?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Tanvi, for having me here. I lead cybersecurity and risk in the public safety sector across APAC, and I also advise organizations through risk assessments, regulatory uplift, and complex cyber or AI security related incidents. I work at the intersection of cyber law, technology, and governance to help businesses move fast without putting their customers or stakeholders at risk. And that's exactly where I think the real AI related challenges are showing up. And that's the lens I'm bringing to today's conversation.
Thank you, Gaurav, and I agree. Sophie, I'll end with you if that's okay. Last but not least.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophie Farthing. I am a human rights lawyer by training. I'm currently head of the responsible technology programs at the Human Technology Institute based at UTS. The University of Technology, Sydney, for those not from Sydney. So I feel like I'm the wild card maybe on this panel, but a lot of the work, HTI is a relatively new organisation. We are a combination of human rights lawyers like myself, policy experts, data scientists, and we're looking to make sure we get the most out of new technologies like AI. And by getting the most, we mean making sure that our adoption, our development is all human-centered. So my work at the moment is really looking at AI. So the Responsible Technology Program is looking at how we think about regulation and what the future of AI regulation might be, and then also looking specifically at our regulatory ecosystem.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like everyone's got extremely diverse experience and hopefully diverse views on some of the questions that we asked today. So I, for one, am very excited to hear you all speak. Now, it's a bit of a loaded question because, of course, I did come up with the title, but in your own words, what does the term security mean in the context of AI? Are we talking about cybersecurity? Is it better to instead say data protection, or does security mean something else entirely? And I might start with you, Gaurav, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. If we remember after the Robodebt Royal Commission, we were all reminded of an undeniable reality. When automated systems make decisions that harm people or lead to invalid decisions, we can't shift accountability to the algorithm or machines. That accountability stays with humans, and more importantly, organization leaders who set the culture across the organizations. We've seen the same pattern in the Information Commissioner's actions against Clearview AI, an organization that, without users' consent, used facial recognition software to collect and analyze facial data. And in the upcoming Privacy Act reforms that Carly Kind is leading, tightening rules around high risk data processing. So when we talk about security in the age of AI, we mean cybersecurity throughout the data lifecycle, which is from the collection to eventual disposal. How we collect and secure data, how models transform it, and how decisions our systems make at scale, and how us humans consume those mechanical decisions to then go and make decisions that impact the community at large scale. So in addition to securing data, networks, and computers, everything that Tanvi you mentioned, I think we now need to secure trust, legality, and accountability at much larger scale in every AI-driven decisions that we allow into our community of businesses.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic way of looking at it. And trust in particular, I think I read that about 30 to 40% figure in between that of Australians do not currently trust the potential or the capabilities of AI, which even as a naturally skeptical nation seems very high, seems like a point to address.
Absolutely.
Deborah, you mentioned that your job has taken you into considering things like physical security in quite a lot of detail. I mean, is that what security means to you in the context of AI, or is it something broader?
Oh, well, absolutely. And the way that we utilize our data to enhance security, to me is, really pivotal in terms of the practical operation of a business. Um, you know, security, thanks to AI, has been such a big growth area. But what for me, it's meant that the message that I bring to the organisation is really founded in a sense of discipline around how we're implementing this new tool to enhance our security options on a site. You know, and the big part of that is that making sure that, you know, the decision makers don't fall into that trap that AI will instantly fix all of their problems. And, you know, when ultimately, I mean, yes, it can enhance their capabilities in terms of, say, staff reach across a site, but, you know, that actually it can create other problems if they're not utilizing it carefully. Like any great tool, it's about, you know, making sure that you've got the right skill set to manage it safely. So I've been working in that sort of space to try and ensure that those stakeholders understand the incredible capability of that tool, but also the risk that comes with it. You know, so very much a case of, for me, ensuring that there's a human oversight that doesn't get eliminated by this sort of sense of economy that everybody seems to leap to when there's suddenly this, you know, fabulous technology available.
Thank you, Deb. And that reference to humans in the loop seems like a great point to introduce Sophie into the conversation, who, as you say, is a human rights lawyer by training, probably have your own unique views on what security means.
Yeah, I certainly took a bigger, like a step back a bit, I think, which is the point of view I bring as a human rights lawyer. I think security in the age of AI, I always think about it as in a political sense, you know, security of our democracy, security of a lot of what we as Australians and in other comparable democracies, what we hold dear and what we seek to protect. So for me, security really means, when it comes specifically to AI, that we get all the societal and economic benefit that AI promises. And there are some big lofty promises there. And Deborah, you know, you certainly alluded to some of those, and they're significant. But also on the flip side, in order to get those benefits, we need to make sure that individuals are protected, and bringing that human rights lens, it's making sure human rights are protected and promoted when it comes to AI. You know, we mentioned trust. I'm sure we'll come back to trust. I certainly, some of the don't mean to foreshadow what we're going to discuss, but some of the issues I think we're going to discuss do centre around that concept of trust. And as you said, Tammy, there's some pretty significant research around, you know, pretty dismal levels of trust that Australians have in AI. And we're certainly not going to get the benefit from AI adoption unless people trust it, unless everyday Australians really trust in government use, in business use. So when I talk about, you know, that AI bringing that benefit and having to protect against risk, it's making sure that we facilitate that responsible development and use of AI. And that means, you know, making sure our current laws are applied, making sure our regulators can fulfill their mandates, and when we need to, having those harder edge safeguards in law.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic answer too, and really resonates, I think, with the point that you're making, that it's not just that we keep humans in the loop, but also that the average Australian trusts and is comfortable with the power that AI might have in their day-to-day lives. So to take us back down to the ground again, I'd like to ask a question maybe to Deborah in the first instance. Have you seen examples in your practical world and your professional life of AI technology being used either to enhance security or in a way which otherwise minimizes harm? And I'd love to know as well if that's been in an online context or a physical context, or both.
Well, certainly I've seen examples of AI improving the ability to reduce risk and minimize harm. From my experience, we've seen it in terms of more minute scale, in the sense of ensuring that, for example, workers are wearing appropriate PPE in a workplace environment. You know, the ability to scan a whole site and basically give a number of how many people are not wearing PPE is a massive benefit in terms of trying to raise awareness of that kind of safety element. But, you know, also we've seen it with detecting of, for example, a forklift in a time and a space where they're not supposed to be operating. Separation of humans and forklifts are pivotal in a lot of environments, and you know, certainly some of my experience is you know, fundamental, but actually in certain environments they're so comfortable with it, it's actually a difficult thing to change the mindset around. You know, again, it's there's lots of also opportunities in terms of minimizing environmental harm, for example. So we've seen some of that, you know, in place with, you know, for example, dumping of rubbish, that sort of situation, which is actually quite a valuable tool in terms of detection of who the person involved might be. Those sorts of things are very obviously super efficient and save you from having people on the ground.
Yeah, yeah, they're great examples. And I think what I liked about some of the examples you gave is that they don't necessarily involve the collection of intrusive amounts of personal information or personal information for reasons that can't be justified under law. Some of those examples are very tailored at security of people and their safety, which is something I'm sure we can all get behind. Gaurav, I'd like to hear your answer to the same question.
Yeah, I've definitely seen in both online and physical worlds how AI tools can come to the aid of automating, scaling up organizational capabilities to help their customers and stakeholders. Banks are using AI to catch financial fraud and scam before it happens and impacts their victims. There are AI tools that can now detect scam calls and text messages at the source and then go deploy AI bots to actively engage the scammers, attackers, divert their attention and resources, and go take a step further and extract real-time intelligence like mule accounts, crypto wallets, phone numbers,
Oh,
and scripts. That upstream disruption is already being used across telcos, financial services, and law enforcement agencies in Australia. In
yeah.
physical world, we see the same pattern. Real-time translation on police body-worn cameras is allowing officers to have bi-directional conversations with people who speak a different language. And that reduces escalation, creates safer encounters for both parties involved in that encounter. Airports are using it too. Changi, Heathrow, and Sydney airports are all using AI-assisted X-ray screening to identify prohibited items faster and more accurately than humans alone. But we also need to understand, going back to the points mentioned earlier, Deborah and Sophie, that the humans in the loop, that's extremely critical. We are at a stage there where we cannot let AI to make all those decisions 100%. So it's really critical to keep humans in the loop. And we see that happen in both online and real world, how AI is enhancing capability, not necessarily removing the humans.
Mm. I've learned something there. I mean, I had no idea about the level of sophistication of the AI bots that can be deployed against scammers. I wouldn't mind one myself if you can tell me if there's a way to do that. Maybe after the seminar, I would
Absolutely.
love to redirect my scam calls that I seem to have a number of every day. Uh, Sophie, I guess putting to you, I'm not going to ask the same question to you, but you spoke really eloquently earlier of HTI and how I guess you put people and their needs at the center of new technologies like AI, how they're designed and the kind of governance regimes in place. We've got some great examples from Deborah and Gaurav as to how AI can be used in practice. Drawing on that, what are some policy and other implications of using AI in that way or indeed in any other way?
Um, I'm gonna sneak in a question. I shouldn't do this to you, Tammy, but I'm gonna sneak in one example of
Please.
and which don't worry, I'll get to those policy implications. But drawing on the work of TI, I think Gaurav and Deborah just gave some really good examples that everyone wants out of AI. You know, everyone wants
Yeah.
that kind of protection that is about human rights protection. And also, I think one thing I'm really excited about when it comes to AI is evidence-based policy making. So it's like the holy grail when it comes to government decision making, how closely it's tied to evidence. And drawing the work of my HTI colleagues, they're currently using machine learning and Bayesian statistical analysis to look at data held by New South Wales Department of Education to understand what causes kids to experience school at a disadvantage, with huge implications for the rest of their lives. So what they are doing, and I won't go, I am not a mathematician, as I declared at the beginning. So they are able to, the way they are able to analyse vast quantities of data that is pretty disorganised and then go in the field and test qualitative responses. What AI, the information AI is giving them at scale for these big problems is so exciting, because it means that government decision making will really be informed by hard evidence, which is always hard. And I think whenever we're talking about AI implications, I'd say whenever we're talking about the benefits of AI, whether it's in scam protection, which is such a significant problem, particularly for marginalised communities, our older communities. There are, I guess, a couple of implications that I take from that and what we are working on. And one, I think, is still pretty high level, and I think we'll get to some of the media governance implications, but it's making sure those policy and regulatory settings are right. I think that is really key. Because we've seen when it goes wrong, we've already mentioned this, that lack of trust that people will have. I think the second really big implication for me is finding a way to balance different interests or different vested interests in the use of AI in particular context. And because I do that I use the human rights framework to do that. It's when we get to situations like Kmart and the Privacy Commissioner's determination in relation to Kmart's use of facial recognition technology, she used a proportionality analysis, which is a human rights mechanism to understand we live in a society where there are different interests. Kmart had a clear interest in how they were rolling out facial recognition technology. And what the Privacy Commissioner did was balance that against the right of privacy of everyone going into the store. And she used a really practical process, which is in our privacy legislation and is in human rights law, to go, is this the least impact that we can have on everyone's privacy? What are the decisions made around the use of the technology in this circumstance? And she weighed that up, and what she found, in a much more complicated way than I'm describing it, but basically she found that it was disproportionate, the impact on privacy, when it came to Kmart's use of facial recognition technology throughout their stores. So I think they're the big implications. Again, it's getting those regulatory policy settings right, and it's a way that we can balance, so we get the benefit, and making sure also that it doesn't go wrong, which means we're all going to suffer ultimately.
Yeah, and I think you've called to mind for me the not yet mandatory, at least for the wider Australian community, but extremely essential process of conducting a privacy impact assessment, or something akin to that, like a human rights impact assessment, or dare I say it, an AI impact assessment, which is an awful acronym, AIIA, I believe, before deploying new technologies. And before anyone on the webinar is worried, I don't think that necessarily needs to look like 3 different pieces of governance. I think potentially that's the same impact assessment, drawing upon all of the various either competing or, I guess, connected interests that we have in deploying these kinds of technology safely and well. Deborah, Gaurav, do you have anything to add, I suppose, from a policy perspective, given that you both operate in a slightly different space from Sophie?
Well, yes. I mean, look, what Sophie said is absolutely true. Hard evidence is hard, and I have certainly been trying to ensure that the business that I advise is aware that actually certain parts of the technology need to be approached with real caution, and in particular facial recognition technology, the use of biometric data. These are things that, whilst they sound great and easy and quick, they're actually fraught, because a lot of the time there's no background preparation done in terms of understanding just how powerful the tool is and the level of responsibility that comes with the use of it. So very much for me, in terms of policy around AI, I am reinforcing there's a legitimate purpose. I try and make sure that we distill it down to a use case scenario whenever there's new technology now, and it seems to be, well, almost everywhere, it seems. You know, my friend in the IT department, I keep him close because I know he's very enthusiastic, as you know, Tanvi,
Yes.
quite passionate, and with that comes a little bit of over exuberance sometimes, but you know, like it's a thing that we're really educating our technology people to be aware of the risk in a way that they haven't really considered previously. You know, and you know, in some instances, it's a simple thing as starting out with an offline system.
Yeah.
That, you know, because that data is so valuable, starting out with you know, certainly like an impact assessment as to what we're using, how we're using it, and being really focused on those sides of things so that we know going in what we're aiming to come out with.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
try and reduce the scope creep that just seems to be so easily done.
Yeah.
Um,
Excellently put. Particularly scope creep and purpose limitation, as it's known in privacy law, is so important to protect against. And to be clear, I think the exuberance of IT professionals is extremely welcome. I know you do too, Deborah, because that there's a really important balance to draw there, I think, between the potential of new tech and I guess the uh, encouraging kind of stodgy lawyers like me to come along on the ride, but to do it, you know, to do it with seatbelts on as well. Gaurav, love to hear your any kind of rights of reply or final points you have to make on that question,
Yeah, and if I can have slightly different wordplay on AI, IA, the
please.
IA, if we pause for a moment and think, what is really AI? At this stage in AI's evolution, it's not fundamentally different from any pre-existing technologies. It will get to that stage, but in my opinion, at this stage, it's intelligent automation. And if we think about AI, and I'm so glad that I have been of the opinion that AI does not create a new legal category, and thank you, Sophie, for validating that. It just raises the bar for demonstrating that we are using the technology lawfully and proportionately. So
Mm,
our existing telecommunications and surveillance frameworks already govern how communications and metadata and how data collected by AI is handled. So in my opinion, there's AI does not, given that it's intelligent automation, it's not a fundamentally different technology at this point in time. It does not necessarily need to be governed any differently from how technology of the existing world we would. So the policy and regulatory implication falls straight back to the laws we already operate under, complemented by any new evolution that Australia would evolve in line with EU's
mm,
AI Act. But if we quickly take a look at EU AI Act, it's no different from GDPR and Privacy Act. It's an upliftment of the bar, and it still follows that data life cycle from the point of collection to disposal. So that's a reassurance that, oh, we can govern this AI with our existing laws if we just raise the bar a little bit.
mm. That's a really interesting perspective. I feel like I need to give Sophie a chance to respond if she wants to, because you may have views on that way of thinking too.
Yes, and I guess I might qualify a bit. So I totally agree that we need to start with tech neutral laws. Okay, she has been saying that for several years. It's really important. But there will be occasions where we need specific regulation. I think there are also challenges to how our current laws are being it may require some amendment, but whether we need to leap to something that come that is being generated overseas. I think we need an Australian response, and that means looking at how our laws are currently applied. And there are some challenges, definitely. There's also challenges. I think the other thing, our laws are only as good as they can be enforced. So another piece of work we're looking at is, how does AI challenge how our regulators operate? And there are definitely some challenges there. So there are a lot of layers when it comes to thinking about the regulatory framework for AI. There are some real downsides to an overly prescriptive approach that we've seen in the EU AI Act, which is really, yes, it's certainly an uplift on the GDPR, but I would also say, it is a whole other approach to the use of technology with prohibited practices, and it kind of remains to be seen how that's going to roll out, and the changes that have come certainly this week in looking at how that some changes, quite significant ones, are going to come with the AI Act. So I think there's that overly prescriptive approach, and then there's the let it rip approach that we're seeing in the US, but there's somewhere in between that, and there are other approaches we're seeing in India and Singapore. So yes, but certainly Australia has robust laws and robust regulators. So the first question is AI challenging how those laws are actually applied? That's all I would add.
And I think you've both raised extremely good points. And the fact is, like, there is no settled answer to these questions. We all have different perspectives. I suppose what will be really interesting will be the government's national AI strategy, which is due to be published at the end of this year, because it will, that there is an argument that the approach the government is taking is a bit closer to using existing laws to do the dirty work. But whether there's anything additional that's built in or recommended by the government, I think is something we're all probably waiting to see on tenterhooks, or at least I am anyway. To go back to this idea of defining concepts that we hear all the time and use all the time without always knowing what they mean, a bit like your definition of AI, Gaurav, which I think would have been really helpful to the audience. I hear responsible AI and ethical AI everywhere these days, usually in the context of governance. Explain it to me like I'm 5. What does that concept mean to you, given the space that you work in? Happy for any of you to answer that one.
Yeah, it's challenging to explain it to a 5-year-old. But
explain it to me like I'm in my 30s, let's say.
So when I think about responsible or ethical AI, I think about the moments where things went wrong. I talked about robo-debt, and that was the opposite of responsible AI.
Yeah.
Responsible AI is simple. It's the discipline of making sure our systems do not create harm that we can't see, can't explain, or can't rectify. It's about knowing what data went in, how the model reached a conclusion, and what happens when the output is wrong. And it's about making sure vulnerable people aren't the ones who pay the price for automation beyond their control. And ethical AI is the same idea expressed through a slightly different lens: fairness, transparency, accountability, and the ability to challenge a decision if you are affected by the decisions made by those systems. So, for example, real-time translation in Axon body-worn cameras enables law enforcement officers to communicate across language barriers. Facial recognition can identify individuals in high-risk scenarios. It can also, AI-assisted recognition can also segregate, going back to Deborah's example, between humans and forklifts. In our context, it can segregate between a friendly versus an enemy person. And these tools genuinely reduce risks. They're evolving, as we discussed earlier. They're still at the very early stages of their evolution. They're worst they can be. They will only keep getting better. But when these are deployed with strict governance, clear limits, and full transparency about how they work, and when they're used, they can massively complement our capabilities. So when we think about responsible and ethical AI, we think about just one thing: making sure the AI we deploy behaves in ways we can justify to A, regulators, defend in a legal scenario, and then B, also explain it to people these tools impact.
Yeah, great. That's a fantastic working definition that you gave at the start of that. Deborah, any thoughts? Responsible AI, ethical
Well,
AI?
I'm still fixated on the 5-year-old explanation. Look, I think it's like any tool. It's if you're allowed to use it, if you're trained to use it, if you use it properly, and if you put it away at the end, everybody's happy.
That sounds like a very 5-year-old explanation, actually.
That's where I stayed. I mean, Gaurav's got a great, I mean, terrific. I can't add to what they've got to say.
I think you just did. I'm going to test that on my 5-year-old tonight. Sophie.
Yeah, I'm laughing because certainly doesn't apply with my 4-year-old. But I would actually take elements of what both Deborah and Gaurav have just said. I think Gaurav, you gave a really good working definition of responsible AI, what it actually means in practice. I think the term responsible AI, ethical AI, like, it's obviously hugely problematic for us, I think, in some ways, unless you think about it really practically. We have, as abundantly clear from all the answers I've given, I really think about responsible AI very concretely within the substantive norms, within the international human rights law framework. Like, that's what I go to when I think about responsible AI. The most important piece here, and I think this is what Gaurav has really demonstrated, is what responsible AI is in action. What if I could sum it up, it's making sure there's accountability. And if you're working towards accountability, then all those practices, should, and all those decision making should be informed by that, whether you're being accountable to a regulator or accountable to users. And I think what responsible AI, where I see it in practice, and I think might be of interest to people listening, is what it looks like in governance. I think we have an AI corporate governance program at HTI, and it's really clear there's some really interesting work that's been done in recent years by the ASCD, by HDI, and then what makes up responsible AI governance. And it's, like Gaurav and Deborah have said throughout this seminar, it's making sure the roles and responsibilities are clear, making sure there's accountability around procurement processes, making sure the boards, directors aren't just going, well, the IT guy told me, so Deborah keeping her IT guy close is very clever. That's accountability. That's responsible AI in action. And the only other thing I would add to that, I mean, there's lots you could add, but the one thing I wanted to highlight, I think it's really thinking about your employees. Like, that's such a key part of AI adoption, is the skills and the people and the culture. Like, it's really thinking across those three aspects within your organization, and understanding, that accountability, responsibility, AI within those really practical structures that involve the everyday actions of employees, which is a lot of what we're here to talk about today.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and I think bringing the entire organization along on the journey, we talk about board accountability, I think a lot more than we used to, for sure. But that idea of being accountable to your staff as well, potentially to unions who may represent your staff, I think is also probably one Nicola can elaborate on, but one that's worth discussing. So it almost seems like every day or perhaps every week brings with it news on AI advancements, AI regulation, or comments on the lack thereof. We've already had some today. And at times, AI mishaps. And I know I was reading last night on Anthropic's recent announcement that they are the first victim of an entirely AI orchestrated cyber attack, which, if true, is quite terrifying. What recent developments have in this space particularly have garnered your attention? I'll start with you, Sophie, again, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So many we could be. I was actually really useful prep to think, now that we're heading towards the end of the year, what 2025 has looked like. But I think I'd say one really interesting mishap this week, or report about mishaps, and a lot of the work we've been doing this year is the impact on the legal profession. So there was a really interesting report released this week by the UNSW Law and Justice Foundation that analysed cases across 10 common law jurisdictions where generative AI had been used or was suspected to have been used. So when it comes to a profession that's being rapidly changed by AI, it's the legal profession, and what the significance is for individual practitioners, both professional consequences, reputational risk that comes when they use AI, and it's moving so quickly. it seems generative AI is the great deceiver, and obviously lawyers are continuing to rely on it to their detriment. So that was probably my practical, really at the top of my agenda this week, thinking about a profession that's been transformed. Looking back, I think it's incredible to think that this has all happened this year. You know, we started off the beginning with the US, the Trump administration rolling back a lot of the protections and really shifting US policy. And a lot of this year has flowed from that. So when Trump came in and rescinded the Biden administration executive order, really put in place a shift where I think it's the golden age of AI that he is going to herald, which will see, US technology being the basis for AI globally, real ideological shift, so that removal of diversity and equity measures. So, and I think from that, we have just had the ripple effects of that. So in Australia, and as I said, there's a lot more that happens around the world other than US, but I think we'd all agree that the US impact on domestic policy has been the most profound. So thinking about in Australia, we've had change of election. Again, that was only in May.
I know.
Where we've
Long
had
year.
a complete, it's been a long year. We've had a complete shift when it comes to, Australian domestic policy and regulation around AI. This time last year, we were still heading towards mandatory guardrails under the former Minister for Industry, Ed Husic, and we've had a real shift with a change of minister, with a real shift of focus heralded by the Treasurer, looking at innovation and the importance of AI to the Australian economy. And I think we're seeing the repercussions of that decision making. And there's a lot of nuance that has also developed. But as you said, Tamby, we're going to finish the year with the National AI Capability Plan, and it remains to be seen what's in that. But we've had a few breadcrumbs, haven't we? I mean, that aren't too significant, that it may go broader than just capability. There's a lot of demands to have, from depending on which interests that you're talking about, whether you're talking about data centers. We have a lot of policy and a push towards that, investment in data centers. You've got still people like HDI making sure, hoping that their capability plan looks at prevention of harm and that broader cohesive vision for Australian AI. So, and I guess I'd finish off with the developments keep coming. What we're seeing in the EU in particular, some of the shifts that might come into play, and I'm still, someone on this call may be well across it by now, but I'm certainly getting my head around what that omnibus means and the changes to the GDPR, the AI Act, how far it goes to the Digital Services Act. And so I think, yes, there is no quiet time when it comes to AI policy. So
No, and you and me both when it comes to the omnibus. I mean, I think we're getting new information every day, and whether it will, I guess, maybe water down some of the very strict protections in the AI Act, or in fact the GDPR, or just do something completely different from what we are all expecting, will be really interesting to see. And you're also not alone in worrying about the legal profession. I did see this morning that Chief Justice Gageler has, I won't ever put it as eloquently as him, but has spoken about the difficulty of courts being almost a quality check between both self-represented litigants and law firms using AI to put together legal submissions, legal arguments, and maybe not doing it as effectively as they could, or at least, as Deborah said, using the technology without interrogating it, which I think is its own risk for any technology. Deborah and Gaurav, I'll change the question a little bit for you, because I know something we've spoken about, and which Sophie also alluded to, is the use of Gen I, which occupies particular importance for Australians and, in fact, the Australian media, who seems to think that Gen AI is the only form of AI worth talking about. It poses its own issues, obviously, within an organization, but also if it's used by bad actors to create malicious code or very high quality deep fakes. How do you think these risks can be addressed by Australian businesses? And why do you know, this is just my view, maybe it's not yours, but why is a blanket prohibition typically not the answer?
Well, if I can start, I'll start with the easy answer, and Gaurav, you'll get the tricky one, I'm sure. But look, my general experience of people are excited about the technology, and of course it does offer some great benefits, particularly if you're not a natural typist, for example. You can get a great first version of a lot of things done in seconds, and that's such an uplift when you might be under the pump, and the work that you have to do at that moment really isn't super, pivotal to any sort of major strategic piece of work, but like those sorts of benefits are very exciting for a lot of normal people, I think. And, I think that it's really hard to hold them back when they're excited. And if you make a blanket prohibition, you're just going to send it underground. Look, I've been aware of a number of people that send me drafts of work, and I can see it's AI. Sometimes it has a sort of a smell around it that sounds very Gen AI, and I kind of go, yeah. Other times it has a really unhelpful self-reference in it that people haven't thought to eliminate when they handed it to me. So, I use that as a kind of a learning opportunity, because I want them to keep using tools that make them efficient, but I want to make sure they're doing it the right way. And so I will then take the time to go over where my concerns are, for example, with security of the data that you put into it, but also the quality of the output that you're handing on to typically another human who will take like a rather dim view if it's just all machine generated. I think humans naturally can tell the difference between most work that comes out of AI, but I think we actually respond better to work that has a human element to it. I
Oh, I
think that
couldn't
has
have
more
said that.
meaning. So anyway, sorry, thank you.
I couldn't
Thanks,
have
Deb.
said that any better. And probably this is the question I can explain it to a 5-year-old or my 4-year-old one. Like a blanket prohibition on chocolates never works. Similarly, I mean, people want the easiest route, and whether it's employees or any stakeholders within an organization, as Deborah mentioned, everybody wants that first draft, that first automation, that first draft of code. And a blanket prohibition is never going to work. I think the better solution is across any sector, whether it's finance, health, government, is controlled enablement, giving staff secure, approved tools that have gone through prior security reviews, privacy reviews, and giving staff I think the solution is choice, options, not prohibition. Because we all know shadow IT, and even if we do not work in IT world, we all know people will go find tools and will start using tools without informing IT, without informing security, and they will go upload confidential data to those tools without informing anyone. We just don't want that to happen. How do we, rather than discouraging those behaviors, if we can encourage safe behaviors, that here are the organization approved tools that do exactly what you want, and if you want something new, let us know and we can go find tools for you. Those encouraging behaviors can help people make the right choices and keep our data safe, because at the end of the day, it's not about, the conversation is not about tools or shadow IT. It comes back to that risk conversation, comes back
Yeah.
to the decision making conversation. That prohibition, is it helping us reduce risk? It's not. It's actually increasing the risk. So how is prohibition helping if it's not reducing risk in any sense at the end of the day?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm conscious of the time, and I do want to get to, we've got one or two questions that I'd love to get to, if that's possible, panel. So I might skip our last question. That could be maybe a conversation for another day. So I've received this question. New AI-specific workplace bills are planned in New South Wales and Victoria. And Victoria, as some of you may know, is, at least in that bill, proposing that employers prove that monitoring is necessary and proportionate, which is, I think, a pretty dramatic change from existing workplace monitoring laws. How does the panel predict laws and regulations will progress, particularly in Australia, in respect of AI and not just in employment? Obviously, we have touched on some ways that we think that the law will go, or that we hope that the law will go. But Sophie, did you have any thoughts in the first instance?
I would say at the broader level, it's unknown. until we see that national AI capability plan. It also might be unknown, it's a bit of a pessimistic view, until something goes wrong. And then we might see a regulatory response. I think, we're seeing an example of hard edge regulation come when it comes to technology with the social media ban, which is a whole other webinar, I appreciate. But that was a direct response that, it's very interesting implications. As I said, it's a whole other webinar. So I think that, there are a couple of things that what we hope, and I think a lot of AI experts, particularly in the policy space, are planning for when there is that knee-jerk response, and so it can inform government. I think the worker surveillance is a really interesting example of where we might get specific legislation in response to something, probably an area of law that's long overdue reform when it comes to surveillance, and in response to some more intrusive practices that, we've seen that Safe Track case, we've seen the media pick up around that, and the unions also are concerned about it. So so I don't think you can ever give a strong definitive answer when it comes to policy, but I think we're about to get some pretty clear indicators from the federal government at least, and then it's definitely a very good space to watch at the state jurisdiction level when it comes to this issue around worker surveillance.
Absolutely. And it highlights the fact that so much of this is use case specific. The application of these tools in a workplace context, I think, is possibly a real battleground for AI. Whether or not the laws change dramatically, it's something that it meaningfully impacts a lot of Australians. Deborah, Gaurav, anything to add on that question in terms of predictions, looking into your crystal balls?
After you.
I just hope. I can't see through the crystal ball because it's extremely confusing landscape of, and this is coming from somebody who is not a legal expert at all. I the cybersecurity expert. I hope that it finds the right balance between Workplace Surveillance Act and I'm particularly excited about that digital duty of care that the government has reached out to the community for consultation last week. In its first iteration, it would only be applicable to big tech social media companies. But I hope that in the long term, it applies to organizations and employees as well. So how all these seemingly colliding acts, how they come together and complement each other, as opposed to pulling organizations in different ways. And an organization HR person is confused, like, how do I create policies and still comply through these different regulations? And that confusion would lead to internal policies that would not be healthy for anybody. So I hope that's my message, that I hope these acts complement each other in the near future.
Great point.
I don't have a lot to add. I'm not the expert on this space, but I certainly feel like there is this could be a bit of a turning point. I feel that in terms of enforcement, like penalties and so on, I don't think we've quite reached that place where, the size of the penalty has really hit business community in a substantive way. I think to some extent what that means is that they can be a little bit more, a bit too comfortable with that risk, if you know what I'm saying. So I'm just hoping that there's a greater sense of alignment. I think it will be beneficial for practitioners like me in the trenches.
I wholeheartedly agree, unsurprisingly. We've got 3 minutes, so I do want to fit one more question in if we can be quick on this. It is a big one though. Given Australia's position, I guess, as a net importer of AI rather than an exporter, what due diligence questions should Australian organisations be asking third-party AI vendors about security, noting that almost all of them are based or are using models that are based overseas? And maybe that's another one for you, Deborah and Gaurav, given, as you say, Deborah, you're on the ground negotiating these contracts.
Well, look, I just try and be very cautious. I listen to what the sales teams say. I want to know how they put the spin on what they understand the Australian legislative environment looks like, because to me that sends me a signal as to how they're dealing with potential other risks from other countries. And like I'm going on instinct really, because I can't be certain that what they're saying that they're doing is entirely what they're actually doing. So, you know, we certainly try and get a bunch of different views of what the offerings look like. And we try and, you know, in a collaborative sort of sharing environment in the business, we try and understand just kind of what level of risk we're taking on. And we assume that there is some. I think you can't not.
And if I may quickly add to it, the only thing I would say is do not treat AI as any different from any other technological procurement process, because it's not about, again, it's not about technology, it's about securing your data. And where is your AI storing the data, primary form, secondary, the backups? Those are the fundamental questions we ask from any technology vendor about data security do not change. So it's the same questionnaire that you've been using. You might want to add a few more around AI model, hallucination and prediction, all that. But the data security, residency, sovereignty, security clearance related questions do not change.
Great point. Sophie, and anything to add in our last minute?
Probably not with the practical advice, but I would just say it's a huge issue, that accountability piece when it comes to third party, and the reach through powers that our regulators have are limited both in law and then in practice as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's all I can add to those very practical responses.
I mean, to end on an extremely or slightly more positive note, I'm also at the coalface of these negotiations, and I am seeing these sorts of issues being acknowledged, at least by third-party vendors. They do know the kinds of risks that our organizations or customer organizations might have, and I think more than, a couple of years ago, they're willing to respond to some of those contractually, or at least in the answers that they give outside of the contract. With all of that being said, I just want to thank my wonderful panel. You all shared some really incredible insights today, and I'm sure the audience feels the same. So thank you very much for giving your time, especially on a rainy Friday afternoon. And thank you also to our audience for attending. As I say, we'll be sharing a recording after this session, but do get in touch with any more questions that you have. And I am sorry I didn't get to all of the questions today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.